Okay. Show me.
What is up, YouTubers? Dutch in the house. Thank you very much for tuning in for part 3 in this build series with the Foxeer Aura 5-inch freestyle quadcopter frame. I've done a review of this frame, I've done an overview of the parts I'll be using for this build. In this part of the series we'll be looking at the heart of the quadcopter, its stack, the 4-in-1 ESC and its flight controller, which is a very nice stack in my humble opinion, so let's have a looky. And in case you missed the other parts of this video series, I'm trying to build this quadcopter as much with Foxeer parts as possible. So that means I've got a Foxeer stack, 4-in-1 ESC and a flight controller, and in this video I'm gonna obviously show you these and its details, how it fits in the frame, but we'll also test fly it. So at the end of this video you'll see a flying quadcopter, or at least a DVR recording, we'll see. Whatever makes the most sense. Okay, so let's see what we have here. A mini F722 version 2. And that means that it's a 20 by 20 F7 flight controller. Super duper small, as you'll see. Well, actually, there. Super duper small, right? It's hardly bigger than its mounting pattern. And I'll show you a common 20 by 20 flight controller next to it in a second, so you can see how small it actually is. And then, as it's 4-in-1 ESC, a 60 amp up to 8S ESC, BL Heli 32, and that in itself is pretty impressive, right? But it's also a 96 kHz 4-in-1 ESC. And in a second I'll tell you why that's nice or why that's a benefit, but for now here we go. Here is a 4-in-1 ESC, also 20 by 20 mounting pattern. Alright, so here is a close-up of the flight controller, our F722 version 2 flight controller. Very small, and I actually misspoke. I thought I had a different 20 by 20 flight controller, but I don't. So here is a 30.5 by 30.5 flight controller. Also an F7, yeah, a basic flight controller. In fact, it actually says basic over here. Yeah. Okay, so but it does make sense to show you these flight controllers side by side, because this is what you'd usually use in a 5-inch freestyle quadcopter, right? A big old full-size flight controller, and you don't really need it, especially not in this frame, because this frame has a 20 by 20 mounting pattern with 3mm bolts, which is unusual, but here you see that these mounting holes are actually the same size. Again, that is a little bit unusual. Most mini, so 20 by 20 flight controllers, have 2mm bolt holes, screw holes. So do keep that in mind if you were considering this flight controller and or this frame. The entire frame is meant for 3mm bolts. It does have a 2mm 20 by 20 stack mount at the rear, but well, I could have for instance used a different 20 by 20 flight controller with 2mm bolts at the rear of this frame. Okay, and this flight controller only comes with a couple of gummies, that's it. I have told Foxeer to also include a ribbon cable. Maybe if you'd want to use this flight controller in an airplane, you'd want that ribbon cable probably. In most cases a 4-in-1 ESC will come with a ribbon cable, so in quadcopters you don't need an extra cable to come with your flight controller, but should be handy and it can't cost a lot, so I've told Foxeer that it would be nice if they were to include a ribbon cable. Now, as this flight controller is very small, you see the solder pads at the edge of this flight controller. I must say that if you were considering this flight controller for a build, it is an advanced soldering job. The solder pads are small. It's not impossible, it's not rocket science, but if you haven't soldered a lot before, do keep in mind again that the solder pads do require a fine tip and a good soldering iron. That's it. Okay, and you don't see a lot of solder pads, but there are extra solder pads at the bottom. For instance, here you see the interface plug for your 4-in-1 ESC, right? At the bottom of that part, you see the same connections, if you will, but then in solder pad form. That could be handy if you were to want VCC for a DJI setup, for instance. You can get VCC over here. It's also in the plug header, of course, of this 4-in-1 ESC interface, but yeah, it can be handy to solder that up for other peripherals. Okay, and let me see what other things are different from the top and the bottom. Yeah, over here you don't see a row of solder pads. Obviously, you've got a USB connector, USB mini USB. So Foxeer, I would very much like to see the next flight controller come with a USB-C plug. Just saying. Mini USB is a has-been. But okay, so at the bottom over here you see other solder pads. And what are these? TX2. So okay, so a UART. UART2 is over here, and buzzer, 5 volts, and okay. And what more can I tell you about the flight controller? It does have a 3.3 volt pad. Where is it? Where is it? It's somewhere. Oh yeah, over here. It's over here. So I'm actually not completely sure what receivers still need that 3.3 volts. I know that Spectrum receivers used to need 3.3 volts, but I'm not sure if that's still the case. In case you do know, put that down in the comment section below, please. Thank you very much in advance. Okay, so there are pass-through pads over here, a set of 4 pads. And that's meant as a pass-through for TBS receivers to unify VTXs. And I'm not completely sure what the benefit of that is. There is a link in the description to the documentation of the product page of this flight controller. Do look it up. There's a diagram and documentation of how to wire this up. And to me it looks more complicated than not having a pass-through setup. But maybe I'm missing something. I usually simply use smart audio from a UART on the flight controller. And never run the smart audio from my receiver to the VTX. But maybe there's a benefit to that. I haven't seen it. But enlighten me. If you know more than me, please educate me. Thank you very much in advance. And also there's an SDA and SDL pad over here, which is not completely common for flight controllers, but that's support for GPSs, of course. And other than that, it looks pretty normal. Yeah, there's a camera control pad over here. Not all flight controllers have that. And again, it's a very small flight controller. I'm going to be using it in a 5-inch build. This will save me weight and space in my build. Onto our 4-in-1 ESC here, and that one does come with a lot of stuff, or more stuff at least, which is nice. We do get a wiring loom with XT60 pre-soldered on there. Very nice. I'll be using that for this build. Thank you very much. And we get a small little ribbon cable to obviously connect up your 4-in-1 ESC to the flight controller. Again, I would have liked to have seen a ribbon cable like this come with a flight controller as well. Maybe as a spare, again, would have been nice. We also get a capacitor, which is a 560 microfarad 35 volts. Pretty common. As this is an 8S cable 4-in-1 ESC, if you were to want to use this on 8S, should still work. Should still work, probably, yeah, but maybe you'd want a higher voltage capacitor in that case. Again, it should still work. Okay, and it also comes with gummies, 2 sets of gummies. Longer and smaller gummies, and that's actually nice in case you want a little more space underneath your 4-in-1 ESC for wires, whatever. Can be handy, so very nice. And you also get a wiring diagram. Not all that needed, actually, no, not really. Yeah, the Foxeer site also has a product page for the 4-in-1 ESC, obviously, and there's specs and wiring diagram over there as well. It is nice to see that it has been coated, weather coated, so it should be weatherproof at least. Very nice. I don't see a lot of 4-in-1 ESCs come this way. Also, as a size comparison, this might be interesting. Here is also a 4-in-1 ESC. Oops, sorry. This one is a 30.5 by 30.5 4-in-1 ESC, so what you'd call a full-size 4-in-1 ESC, but as you can tell, these are pretty similar in size. So this Foxeer really is a full-size 4-in-1 ESC, but the mounting pattern has been changed. And you don't really need 30.5 by 30.5 anymore, right? So maybe this is the way to go, and especially if you want to run a smaller flight controller. In the case of this 4-in-1 ESC, you'd have to run some kind of converter, right? From 30 by 30 to 20 by 20. In this case, no converter needed. So it is convenient, but still you have a full-size 4-in-1 ESC. And what more can I tell you about this here 4-in-1 ESC? It has small holes over here on the solder pads, which are nice. You can stick the legs of your capacitor through that, which makes it handier to solder things up. So let me actually put this 4-in-1 ESC in the frame to show you what that looks like. Alrighty, hopefully this shows up on camera well enough. One thing I I can show you is that this 4-in-1 ESC is very flat at the bottom. Hopefully you can see that. It's this connector that for the ribbon cable is at the top actually of the 4-in-1 ESC, and in most 4-in-1 ESCs that's at the bottom. And for the rest, yeah, the bottom is very flat. So that's nice, right? This way you can really slam dunk your build with this 4-in-1 ESC, meaning that you can build a low stack. Yeah, let me see actually this connector at the top of our 4-in-1 ESC. Does it interfere with the... Yeah, the flight controller will run into that connector, so it should be okay. You should still end up with a low stack this way. Okay, so this here over here is actually the front of my quadcopter. So I'm building it front to back. This should be the front of our 4-in-1 ESC, and I'm building it backwards to have this capacitor at the front. There's a lot of room in this frame at the front. Also at the back, but this way that capacitor won't be in the way of, for instance, my VTX, which will live at the rear of the frame. Okay, what more can I tell you? Yeah, the next thing I will solder up. I've already pre-tinned all the motor pads over here, and I've already soldered up that capacitor. Yeah, what I'll do next is hook up the power leads. And let me see, I've got a mount for my XC60. There it is, a 3D printed mount for the XC60, and let's see how this works out. Okay, the negative or the ground leads will be at this side. Yeah, that should work. Okay, let's see. I usually actually, or used to, first solder up my power leads to the 4-in-1 ESC and then put everything in the frame. But the downside of that is that usually the power leads then end up a little bit on the long side, which is not what I want. And while I'm looking at this, it looks as if I'd want to have the power leads at the other side of the quadcopter. So positive. I must say that the power leads that come with this 4-in-1 ESC are a little bit thick. not a problem, but they are a little bit thick. Okay, so yeah, like this should be the routing of my power leads. Like so. Okay, so I will snip off the power leads as is, and again this way my power leads will not be any longer than they need to be. there and there. Okay, then obviously I need to pre-tin the power leads after I've completely removed them, or removed the excess over here. Okay, expose a little bit of that wire. Tell me what you think about this kind of video, by the way. Is this in any way useful? I'm not completely sure if it's well visible at all either. We will see, right? We will see. Alright. Okay. I must say, no, this axis is a little bit too small. Yeah, that's better. Obviously, it is paramount, very important to get the orientation of that capacitor right. Probably not really needed for most people, this advice, but make sure that that white line, that white marking on your capacitor is at the ground side of your power pads. Okay, so now we need to pre-tin these wires. Hooking up my soldering iron. There we go. And make sure that those wires get soaked in soldering tin good and well. I've got my soldering iron set to 390 degrees Celsius. Hope that's visible. Alright, here we go. I must say again that these wires are thick. Thicker than I'd probably use left to my own devices. Oh well. Again, these are the wires that came with this Foxeer 4-in-1, in case you're wondering. Okay, those are now well saturated with soldering tin. Let's get the frame back in the shot. There we go. Now for this step, it's gonna be handy to have pliers or calipers, something to grab onto those wires. They'll get hot, right, when you solder them in place. So something like this or this. Again, to hold on to them wires. Okay, doesn't really matter which I take first from the looks of it. Okay, I find that, damn it, this wire is really thick and cumbersome to work with. It has a mind of its own. Okay, here we go. Positive terminal. That actually looks pretty good. Again, I have no idea what this video looks like, but we have the positive terminal well in place onto the negative or the ground terminal. And again, these wires, thick, and they will probably also get a little bit in the way of my receiver. I was planning to put the receiver underneath this capacitor, but with these wires being as thick as they are, they'll take up a lot of room. No biggie, there will be more than enough room at the rear of the quadcopter for my receiver, but still, bit of a shame. Okay, here we go. Ground terminal. And be sure to heat up both that wire and the pad you're soldering onto, of course, otherwise you'll be left with a cold solder. Yeah, I used to do this with everything out of the frame, and it can be handier because nothing gets in the way, like the pillars, the bolts that hold the 4-in-1 ESC in the frame. But we've got it in there. Hot chickadee. Be sure to clean up that soldering tip. Okay, next thing we'll do is attach all the motor wires. Now that is something to keep in mind, or that is something that's different than in my other builds. Usually what I do is run my motor wires around the bolts, the 30.5 by 30.5 screws, the bolts, and run my wires around them like so, and then solder them up to the pads. Makes for a nice and clean setup. However, this being a 20 by 20 ESC, there's a lot less room underneath it. A lot less. Yeah, so that is a downside of this setup, this 20 by 20 setup with a large 4-in-1 ESC and a small flight controller. There's not that much room to hide my wires, if you will. And this will also save me some weight in my quadcopter, but again, do keep that in mind. Okay, so basically what you now need to do is measure up how long you want your motor wires to be, right? And I'm not completely sure how I want to run them yet. Probably the one on my side of this motor to the furthest soldering pad, like so. And then jump that with the second one and jump that again with the third one. Again, it won't be the cleanest setup this way, but it will be lighter than usual, I guess. Okay, so let's snip the first one. There we go. Oops. Okay. Then again, yeah, my fingers will be in the way. Sorry about that, but I'll jump that with the second wire. there, and again I'll then jump that with the third. Hopefully that'll work out. So what I usually do is snip all the wires for all the 4 motors and then pre-tin all the motor wires and then solder things up. But because I'm not completely sure whether this works out, I'm gonna test things with the first motor. Let's do that. Okay, so strip the end of the wire, strip the end of the second wire, and snip the end of the third wire. Okay, then you go ahead and pre-tin those motor wire ends. Check it out. Soldering iron on. And especially for the motor wires, it's handy to have something like this to hold on to them while soldering them in place. Okay, so first pre-tin them. Alright, hartstikke. Then make sure I can actually reach things. Okay, so the first, this motor wire, the one on your right, on your left, sorry, this one will go to the first pad over here. I have decided in my infinite wisdom. Yeah, okay, so first make sure you can actually reach things comfortably before you go and commit to the solder job. Just check if something maybe is in the way, like the bolts or the plug or electronics on the board itself. Then set it in place and solder it up. Oh, beautiful. No idea if you can see that, but that looks absolutely gorgeous. Okay, next one. So this will be the middle wire of our motor, coming off of our motor, and it's also going to be the middle one on our ESC. Yeah, now I actually have this bolt in the way of things. Very annoying. Always try and check those things before you commit to soldering it up. Okay. Alright. And the third one. Yeah, again, that bolt holding on to my stack is in the way of things, but okay. Alright, that looks pretty nice. Let me try and show you what that looks like. At least the soldering looks very clean. And yeah, again, I'm not completely sure. Yeah, you should be able to see what the wire routing is like. I can do this, of course, because my flight controller is very small. These wires won't get in the way of my flight controller. And yeah, should work. Okay, so what I'll do next is I'll solder up the other 4 motors, and then I'll show you what that looks like. And there you go. All my 4 motors are now soldered up, and if I add flight controller, it sits neatly in between all those wires. I could have maybe made a few, the outer ones, a little bit shorter, but well, it's easier to shorten them up than to get them longer, of course. So this, it all fits, that's nice. That's a nice start, right? One tip I might have, lately I've had that the solder pads on my for the motor, so the 3 solder pads per motor, looked a little bit dull or dry. The wires weren't soaking in solder as these are. These look kind of perfect. They look great. And what I found with this build is that I needed to add a little more solder on the pad. So the pre-tinning of the pads of your 4-in-1 ESC, I needed more solder for that. So in case you have that same issue where the wires, the tips of the wires for your motors look a little bit dry, I must add that all those builds I've had that issue with did work. No issue at all basically, but it definitely looks better. That's something. It looks more reassuring. So yeah, and again, probably you'll need to add a little more solder if you have that same issue. Okay, what I need to do now is add a receiver, a camera and a VTX, a video transmitter. And I'll do that off camera. I'll have a separate video about the FB setup, especially the camera, which is a night vision kind of camera. Okay, but for now, in this video, we're gonna test fly this quadcopter. Here we go. Alright guys, here we are outdoors with the Aura frame from Foxeer and the Foxeer stack. Let us see if this makes for a flying quadcopter. So my expectancy is that with this 96Khz 4-in-1 ESC, the stock beta flight tune should be very good already. See, how do I explain that? Well, the motors should react to the flight controller's outputs faster. Hopefully that makes sense. The clock cycle of the 4-in-1 ESC is faster, so more often will the motors get directions on what to do. So again, that should make for a more precise flying quadcopter. Is it true? No. Damn it. No, it should make for a quadcopter that flies more like the flight controller expects. And therefore the Betaflight setup should work out better. And yeah, hopefully it'll also fly well. We'll see right now. Here we go. Alrighty guys, made a flight for the Aura 1, and yeah, it's called Aura 1 because I'm building several of these quadcopters, or quadcopters with this frame. Also, as you will see, this is a bit of a boring spot to fly at, and it's a very sunny day, so all interesting venues are crowded with people. Yeah, makes sense, right? Nice and sunny day, so should be well and good enough to test fly this quadcopter. And sure enough, it flies stock Betaflight. Let's see if we can induce some propwash oscillations. Wow! Whoa, that was very, very nice. No propwash oscillation at all. Haha! Okie dokie. Very nice. It also sounds very nice. Courtesy of these RCN power motors, but maybe also that the tune works out well. Nice. And the FV camera you are watching through is a Cat 3. I'll do a separate review of that camera. It does look a little bit different This camera is aimed at low light flying, so this is definitely not low light. And one of the things I want to test with this camera is if it's usable in daylight as well as in low light. I don't want a one-hit pony, right? A quadcopter I can only use at night or in the evening. But it does look, the sky for instance looks a little less bluish, I'm not sure how to call it, a little muted maybe. But I can definitely see where I'm going. It's I wouldn't call this a freestyle camera. Okay, so but the quadcopter is a dream to fly. I do see, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that in the DVR recording, but sometimes a little bit of interference lines minutely, and I have no idea what that's from. I've got a TBS Unify VTX in it, should be fine, and yeah, most times I've got a clean signal, which is what you want, of course. Very nice. I am glad this is working out. Nice flying quadcopter for sure. Cool. Okay, so what more can I tell you about this stack? Yeah, so this is the Pro version. And what this Pro version has over the non-Pro version is that pass-through, which I am not using. I don't really see the benefit of it, but well, maybe it is a benefit to others. Also, the BEC is a little more powerful than in the non-Pro. It has a 3 amp BEC. So maybe if you want to use it in an airplane and run servos from it, that's a benefit. And what more? Yeah, oh, it has a pit mode on a switch, which I will probably not end up using, but if you want to race this flight controller, that's definitely a benefit. So you can simply hit a switch and be in pit mode. That's definitely handy. Again, I don't race, so it's not that much of a benefit to me, but I can definitely see that that would be handy if you were to race. Okay, so much for my video on this this stack from Foxeer. As you can see, it makes for a flying quadcopter, which is great. And maybe I'll do a longer term roundup of both of these stacks from Foxeer. We'll see. For now, works out. And if you are left with questions, hit me up a comment down below. Catch you on the next video. Bye bye.